everybody here got their start by somebody else opening that door for them and giving them that shot. And it's
Exactly.
still how it works. Yeah. Hi, this is music biographer Jake Brown. I am happy to be here on Famous with Jacy Don Valeras.
Jake Brown, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are an award-winning music author, music biographer. You have been doing this for a very long time, 25 years, and you're about to release your 60th publication. Tell me a
Yes.
little bit about that book. I know it goes behind the scenes of some of our favorite songs in country music.
Songs in Nashville is the book. It is out June 24th at hardcover in stores. There's also an ebook. There's also a audiobook, which I think is really actually kind of important because so many people are driving or they're on the way to something or they're waiting. I mean, the way that we absorb stories today that discounted previously the accessibility of the audiobook. So you can like listen to this chapter by chapter. If, for instance, you're going to be sitting on a train or you're going to be sitting on a plane or anywhere really, you could break it up into individual studies of each of these songwriters and stream along their catalogs. It has everybody from Jelly Roll and Clint Black and Vince Gill to Hillary Lindsey and Lori McKenna and Liz Taylor. Taylor Swift's co-writer Liz Rose. And the other thing that I hope within the book, is that you really get a sense of what Music Row is like. I mean, songwriting is a job for these folks as much as it's a muse and there's a mystical element to it. I mean, those who get up every morning and go down to 15th and 16th Avenue and those houses and writing houses and sit there and crank out the hits that country music fans love in the most part are unsung in a lot of cases. I've been doing behind me the Nashville Songwriter series. I started in 2012 doing this, and that book came out in 14. The second volume came out in 18. This is really the culmination. There's guys in this book who rest in peace, like Kinky Friedman and Jack Tempchin and Rock Kilo and Jim Weatherly, who wrote Midnight Train to Georgia, and others who are no longer with us. We're proud to have their final interviews. We've got The Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer writer, Randy Brooks, but it really also has a lot of music industry veterans that I'm not sure you know them from the songs, but you don't necessarily. I mean, you would know their names if you're here. But as an example, Sonny Curtis, Merle Haggard and Freddy Powers, Bobby Braddock, Buddy Cannon, who produces with Willie Nelson today, Sonny Throckmorton, Dallas Frazier, rest in peace, is another one of our departed writers. But it really just takes you through every iteration of country music's history over the past 50 or 60 years. It takes you into a music row you might not know, or from previous, pre-condo, sort of existence of really famous writer houses, of really famous studios, of really famous, live venues where write-arounds happened. It wasn't all just a Bluebird, as although Bluebird's important, but you also get a sense of the business of what it's like for a lot of these people to not only, get in the door and have their first hits, but then survive for a whole career while maybe raising a family and also in some cases, candidly making peace with their own dreams of being a star, and they're sort of working not lot in life, but their career wound up being that of a songwriter. There's still a really, really powerful community of respect for that. So like not every songwriter's got the greatest voice. Some like Natalie Hemby and Hillary Lindsey are amazing, but they can still go out and even be brave enough to get on stage and sing these beloved songs. And to the fans that are there, it's as if the star is singing them because these are the creators. So we just really wanted to celebrate them.
Yeah, it's interesting because, talking about these songwriters going out and performing these songs, this almost feels like what you would get if you went out to a writer's round. It's like the written version, because people who are local to Nashville, you go out and you see these songwriters perform at the Bluebird or at the listening room, and they tell the stories behind these songs. But if you're not in the room, you often don't get the opportunity to witness that. So this feels like you're capturing that in written form.
That's exactly what we did, and you put that quite well. The other thing that we hope is that the reader is taken inside. As an example, Jelly Roll. That interview I did 9 years ago, and it was for a documentary that never came out on country rap. And same with Colt Ford. And so, I think we are inundated to the point of probably common knowledge with the more current him being a star. This takes you to before he was. And it really takes you back to his childhood and through, his rise through the penal system and through hip hop and mixtapes and into a genre that, you might not necessarily know if you're more of a fan of this, of the very talented voice that he has then since put on display that's made him the superstar he is today. But it gives the reader a sense of what his dreams were at the time, what he, laying in a prison bunk, what he envisioned for the arena success he's had today. And, guys like David Ray and other, country rap, such a niche genre. There's guys like John Connor and Big Smo and Ray Riddle, aka O-Rig, who I work with still today, editing my show about the Authors TV that airs on Tubi. And all of these guys who kind of came up together and then went their own ways, but they still, when Jelly Roll blew up, these people all came up with him. Haystacks there, others who were instrumental in helping him, come up. If you go to Vince Gill or Clint Black, if you love 90s country, you get taken right inside their stories firsthand from when they were unknowns to when they became stars. You get Don Cook with Brooks and Dunn. You get Jeff and Jody Stevens if you want Luke Bryan. So you just really get the histories of when these guys were unknown and came in, and these producers were taking chances, maybe giving them a demo session even or something, seeing promise in them or using them as a vocal singer. Cole Swindell talks about writing This Is How We Roll while on the bus as the merch guy for Luke Bryan before he ever blew up. So it's important, we have a wonderful chapter at the end with Will Weatherly and Drew Parker and Josh Thompson, Luke Combs and Morgan Whalen and other hits of today. But they talk about like coming up with Luke Combs when he was an unknown and those guys coming up together. So hopefully you really get a sense of where the roots of these stars' stories began, whether they're songwriters or performers.
Was there a story that totally took you by surprise or blew your mind when you learned about it?
Many, yeah, too many to probably, because 300 songs in the book the hits that we cover. I love personally, because I had the privilege of working with him for the last 4 years of his life, Freddy Powers, when he had Parkinson's disease and was just entombed on his tour bus, and his absolute guardian angel and widow Catherine and I, while he was alive, and then after his passing, really endeavored over about a decade to get the Spree of '83 written. And I pull from those interviews with Merle Haggard and Freddy Powers in the introduction, and just thinking about the fact that these guys were on houseboats in the midst of the 1980s, doing coke and partying with girls and all of the rock star excesses that you could think of, all while writing songs that became hits. And they were having so much fun. They turned down Frank Sinatra, called them and invited them to come to the White House and perform for Reagan. They said, we're having too much fun out here on the lake. So as much as it's a job, you do also capture the moments of joy and euphoria that these songwriters get when they're creating together. Another example of that would be the Girl Crush sort of chapter we talk about with Lori McKenna and Liz Rose and Hillary Lindsay, and these like sleepaways they do where they go and they just the way that they talk about organically writing songs together and like that kind of thing, taking the fan of these songs inside the kitchen where they were sitting writing, or Sonny Curtis wrote I Fought the Law. That's one of my favorites. We included that in the intro. Shane McNally talking about Body Like a Back Road and the evolution, excuse me, of the various iterations that went through over time, perfecting it to the point where it then became one of the longest running radio singles in history, right? In country, right. 47 weeks or something crazy like that. And so, there's also, though, a focus on, remember, country music has two and sometimes three, depending on how you consider it, but definitely two, Billboard Hot 100 and Hot 100 Airplay. So every week there's a new number one. Maybe they stay 2 weeks, but it's a constant competitive wheel of new hits being churned out. And if you were somebody coming to town here, Luke Bryan has that Land of a Million Songs. I mean, if you're coming here and you're trying to get a foot even in that door, let alone to get into becoming a spoke in that wheel, you have to have the right early luck. You can't, for instance, sign a bad publishing deal or sign with a manager that's going to take you nowhere or lock yourself in with situations. You have to, at the same time, be willing to go out there and do the writers' rounds and meet other unknown songwriters and almost form a community that you come up together with. And like, I remember when I'm a songwriter producer, not of country, which is the liberty of me being able to write this series because I'm not also going, listen to my song. But I came here in '03 and I would go out and do those Commodores and Boardwalk Cafe back when open and Beyond the Edge and, with my little groups with people. And now, the stuff I do is more rock or hip hop. I mean, I produce with a guy named Aaron Harmon for many, many years now. And we do a lot of different studio bands. But the point is like being able to access these people musically and know they were also talking to a musician. I play six instruments. etc. That I could get a more of a vocabulary going about the realities of like, the missteps you can make early on and commiserate with them about being there. Uh, you have to find the right community. You have to be, willing to network. You have to be willing to go out and play your songs. You've got to be willing to sit there till 10 o'clock. If your round doesn't come up, you can't just expect to get there at 7 or think you're going to sneak your way onto the stage. You have to be really careful with who you take your songs and hand them to afterward. If you don't know them, there's like lots of scam pay to play things in town that you have to be leery of. So hopefully the book also gives you a bit of a roadmap through these firsthand memories of these songwriters of how they came up, who they surrounded themselves with, and how it paid off for them.
Yeah, speaking of all of that, the reason I created this show, which is called Famous, is because I'm so interested in people who have experienced such a high level of fame. And I'm so lucky I get to talk to people like that, like yourself. You've been around rock stars and famous country artists and people like this for a very long time. So I'm curious to get your 2 cents on this. What is a negative side that people don't always see that maybe you've experienced?
Well, that would depend on the genre. And I mean, I've written books as an example with a lot of rock bands that were fractious in the sense that they, like Heart is Ann and Nancy Wilson, whether or not the band was started by their ex-boyfriends who were also bandmates in the classic 70s lineup. When we wrote that book, I tried to get input from as many of them as possible while understanding that these two were going to be guiding that. And, bands by nature are, they make great music together, but they're like family. They don't necessarily would never otherwise per se know one another if they weren't related by DNA. And so the bloodlines that musically run through a group's history doesn't always necessarily mean that they're going to get along together and so they go on stage and they do the job. I have a series called Beyond the Beats that the first volume in 18 had Tommy Lee and Lars Ulrich and Aerosmith's drummer, Journey's drummer, the Smashing Pumpkins drummer, Taylor Hawkins, rest in peace, the Chili Peppers. And I'm listing these off because you can, with any of those bands' histories, there are controversies. Tommy Lee leaving Motley Crue and coming back and making a very definitive statement that we can treat each other with respect and keep doing this. And that's a thing that within country music, it's interesting because you might get writers on a song together who met in the room that day. You might also get writers on a song together that have been best friends for years. So there's amalgamations of that come along that sometimes you're advantaged by being in on a write with somebody who has the ear of, say, back in the day, George Strait used to be the George Strait cut. Then it was the Tim McGraw cut. Then it was the Luke Bryan cut. Then it was the Thomas Rhett cut. Now it's probably the Morgan Wallen or Luke Combs cut. But there's the disappointment more within the songwriting rooms of a thing called the hold. And that's where I think I can diplomatically answer that question for country. You're going to get, the reality is that a lot of times a young songwriter is going to get a song that's going to get put on quote hold, which means that either the producer of a big star, the star themselves, their management, somebody in that circle hears it and thinks this could be perfect for Jason Aldean, but Michael Knox is not recording his next album for 18 months. Well, that songwriter, if they trust the people that represent them and those people have a good history of guarantees that they're going to at least cut it. Okay, now they hear that they got a cut. That doesn't mean, as you well know, for the people you talked to, that cut's even going to make the album. If it makes the album, that doesn't guarantee that cut's going to become a single. If it becomes a single, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to become a number one hit. But there's a lot of gamble that goes with this kind of thing. You know, and there's a lessons in letting go, as I hear about time and again. Of you might write a song that you think is the most beautiful thing in the world, and then it gets put on hold, and maybe even the artist that's going to cut it isn't who you originally envisioned it for, and you have to let go of all that and let these songs have their journeys because they eventually find the right home, and they eventually, typically, you know, if they're that good, are going to be number ones or are going to be charting hits. They have a long history of getting there. They're not all written and up. The other thing that I would allude to is hip hop, because that's where I find the most. I mean, I wrote the one and only book on Suge Knight still to date. There's been lots of death row books, but the stories out of that camp are just I've been working with Corrupt off and on for years on his book as an example, and you know there we're going to have all the originals, DOC and RBX and Rage and the people you don't hear about like you do, the Snoops and the Daz, and we've already talked to him and others, but hopefully Dre, definitely Snoop. But I mean those abilities, when I get them to sort of reunite people, and even as not I but me with the people I'm working with after a number of years have passed, that's where it's fascinating because these people all live off the same and eat off the same, as they say, catalog, but publishing wise, which again goes back to the songwriters and the importance of Suge Knight for all the evil that he's accused of, and in some cases did. He also opened doors that had never been opened before, say kicked down, for African American entrepreneurs. And that's why Snoop today owns Death Row Records. Think of the irony and full circle of that.
Right.
That's why you had Rockefeller. I'm not going to mention Bad Boy, obviously, relative to the Sean Combs situation, but there's lots of Cash Money Records, No Limit Records, Jay-Z's Rockefeller, that then became Rock Nation. All of these things began in part because of Suge Knight, whether we want to give him credit for it or not, because he opened those doors. He got Dre and DOC out of these gangster contracts using gangster methods. So that history is fascinating to me because white record executives did that to black artists for decades. I mean, you could go back to Chuck Berry and Chess Records and sharing publishing, a third of his publishing with the owner of the company, which then credited him as a songwriter, because though that system was set up and designed to be pure, it was manipulated for years by the, you know. So you see in the country music lineage a real respect for trying to keep songwriters paid for the music that they've generated that made all this money and hits for so many people. And it's the only of all the genres I've written in, it's the most honest in that pursuit.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, it's the most now rock also has some of that because a lot of times as an example, Motley Crue, I love that group and have had the honor of writing with some of the members. I mean, you behind the scenes, like or you could correlate it to Led Zeppelin's manager with Doc McGee. Doc McGee wasn't going to let his people get ripped off. There was muscle-bound biker guy, just as in hip hop, there's crews there that almost ensure more honesty. Because, as an example, I just finished working with Teddy Riley over 10 years on writing the New Jack Swing, you know, memoir. It's called Remember the Times. It comes out in February through Gallery Simon Schuster. He was protected by gangsters as a kid. I mean, in Harlem, he was coming out of the crack epidemic, and there was that almost don't let. There's a scene in that book where his studio gets robbed at gunpoint by a bunch of masked guys, and the owner's an ex-hustler, and he won't give them the money, and they're getting ready to execute everybody. They recognize Teddy, who was at that time a 15 or 16-year-old prodigy in the neighborhood, and they said, "That's Shorty. Don't touch that. That's a little music kid."
Wow.
Saved his life. So. And then when Gene Griffin, who's this legendary kind of Harlem gangster within the Uptown guy, New Jack Swing sort of pyramid, because he managed Teddy, he went to prison. He came out. He went and slapped Andre Harrell, who told me firsthand that, you know, in the course of intimidating him into giving the publishing control over from Ted. So you see how, and then he had to get a group of scarier uncles, as he calls them, to have a meeting with this guy and basically say, you're going to let go of this kid. You're going to cut ties with him. So that's a pretty intimidating way to start your career
No
before you
kidding.
even work with Michael Jackson. Or so you see it in the histories of a lot of the, you know, the indelible links between organized crime and hip hop. Or even rock and roll. Tommy James and the Shondells is an example. Morris Levy owned that catalog, and Chin Gigante was the head of, you know, was one of the partners in the label. So anyway, it depends on the genre. Country I find to be the most integratable. And I've lived here 22 years, and in the 26 years I've worked in the record business, I mean, especially when you write books or you interview people for books, I have a folder called projects that probably won't happen. I won't even get into some of the people in there. I'd get sued if those interviews ever got, hacked and leaked. And they're just because they reflect the honest discord that can happen with the egos involved. Think about the ego
Right.
that you have to manage. And songwriters don't have to worry about that because other than on Music Row or at the bottom of the music video where they credit them, they're not like, they go to work every day. I mean, they're not on the tour bus sort of sitting around. They're there
Right.
writing songs with the people they're touring with, or at the publishing house. They're not paying them a weekly draw or a monthly draw to sit around. They're paying them to write. So there's a work ethic that was really another thing that we really wanted to emphasize and respect in this book and reflect because, yes, they might have done it in cabins or in houses or there might have been a real relaxed seeming atmosphere to Music Row. That's, I think, by design, so that pressure stays outside of those rooms. So,
You are clearly so passionate about this. I want to know where all of this came from. How did you break into this area of the business? Was this something that you had always wanted to do? I mean, you don't just start writing books with rock stars, right? Take me back a little bit and tell me how this all
yeah,
happened.
yeah. I was uh, 11 and I saw a Bon Jovi concert with my mom and my Aunt Heather and my brother Josh, and we had really bad seats, but they were right next to the stage. And I loved it because I took the worst to them seat, and all I could see was the backstage and just the side of the stage. And it was like mesmerizing. It was like, that's what I'm going to do. And then I got into the record business very young. I was also in bands. I went to LA and tried to do all that, failed miserably, but made my way back to New York. Um, and I met a music publicist named Marcy Northrup, and I was doing freelance writing press releases, and I just always wrote and played a bunch of instruments by ear as a kid. I'm miserable at everything academically. So the point is, through that, she said, you might consider writing a music biography. And I said, no, I don't know that. I think I've never had any ambition to do it. And the group she wanted me to write with was Nelson. Do you remember those guys with the long hair and I
Yes.
can't live without your love and perfect? I said, I don't, I'm an 80s kid, so I know that end of the 80s right before Nirvana. I said, yeah, that's not how I'd want to start. No offense to them, but I said, however, if you can get me book deals for Nikki Sixx and Suge Knight, I'll write those. And she did, and I did. And the Nikki Sixx one was through an indie publisher, and that's got some controversial history, so I'm gonna kind of steer clear of that one. But um, I just have such respect for that band. I don't want to, but the Suge Knight one stuck. And I just started writing mass market hip hop biographies, and then God bless heart, I got it. Well, Afeni Shakur gave me the opportunity and authorized a Tupac Shakur in the studio, which was this idea I had to go inside the making of records. Then Hart signed on, and we did one. Then Lemmy from Motorhead, I met him through writing a book with Jasmine St. Clair, who's a retired adult film star, and that led me to pitch him, and he said yes. So then we did Motorhead in the studio, and then Rick Rubin in the studio, and then that turned into Tom Waits and Tori Amos and AC/DC and Dr. Dre and Iron Maiden and this whole catalog in that series. And I guess from that, I love the idea because I'm in studios myself half the time. I was like, this is like, Dave Cobb told me they've got Rick Rubin's book as a reference guide, the Rick Rubin in the studio as a reference guide that he uses. I mean, that's flattering to know. And the Behind the Boards books, which the third one was all of many of the country music producers in 2020 COVID kind of, but the whole culture of discussing the chronicling the making of records with the bands, with the producers. I mean, this had been done, but when I started doing it, it really hadn't been done in any kind of series formats. And I'm proud of the fact that, in the studio is a trademark 20-year-old series. I just renewed the trademark for the 20th year. It's been published in 9 countries around the world. Nashville Songwriter. For some dumb luck reason, no one had done that or had that title. We were the first book series ever to chronicle songwriters in chapter by chapter format, not only the stories behind their songs, but also them. Um, so it just kind of evolved out of a sort of desire to bring spotlight, I guess, to places I felt like I wasn't reading it. And I mostly grew up reading music biographies and music related anything. King on the, Mansion on the Hill, Hitman, Fred Goodman's book, anything that had to do with the making of records. And it just expanded into these different genres and over 60 books. I've been very fortunate. I don't sleep much. And so I've been fortunate to do that. At the same time, I had the privilege and 2020 and the misfortune of doing a 50th book campaign over COVID, over Zoom, and not talking to podcasters like yourself. But I talked to some who would start asking you about a book and then they'd cut you off 2 minutes in and talk about their podcast for 8 minutes. And I got very frustrated with this and called other authors and said, "Are you going through this experience? Because you can't really talk about a book if it." And I think at that time there was a big boom of people at home with microphones. So it really was like, so luckily coming out of that, people like yourself and others who really, were the real deal hung around, but there was no streaming TV shows that profiled authors. And so I sold this concept to Tubi TV, and they picked it up in 2021, 2022. Seasons 1 and 2 aired, 3 and 4 and 23. 5 and 6 come out this summer. There's 120 episodes just between those. So I have a set, down there at Music Square, the center of town square. I mean, I do Zooms all day interviewing authors about their catalogs. So I've translated what I was doing with the books into profiling the best-selling authors in the world. And I mean, we've got, I don't know, 7 more seasons. It's the first show that episodically profiles authors, much in the same way I feel like some of these books do songwriters. And so that's just what I try to do. I try to just relate to the people I work with and do in the same professions, but focus on them and not on so much the hype and the noise and the stars, but more the people behind the making of these stars. Because country music, I mean, songwriters are the unsung heroes of that business, factually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there's some romanticism that comes with Songland and, oh, Shane McNally's going to pick me and then I'll be signed to Smack, and then Smack's got like 10 writers. The Creative Nations has 5 writers. Even Big Loud Shirt, Craig Wiseman. These are songwriter run publishing houses, which we
Right.
focus on in the book. Tape Room, Ashley Gorley's place, Play It Again, Dallas Davidson's. None of these places have like 50 songwriters and they're buying trucks for, Average Joe's, Colt Ford and Shannon's outfit. These are small boutique operations that Sony might have a larger stable. But I mean, a lot of these houses that we profile in the book that, these songwriters graduated into being publishers, that's really appealing to me because they're caretakers. They really are putting their own money into the belief in the next generation. And that's how it's always worked in Nashville. And that's really a touching place to come back to, because I have to tell you, writing in some of these genres, you see the heartbreak and you see the betrayal that naturally stardom can bring about, and say a crew. Once that rapper or once that R&B star's on tour, MC Hammer went broke in 1 year and he made $20 million. He went broke paying for his entourage.
Yep.
So you see where within the loyalty among the songwriters, it's also capitalized in such a way that you don't have them like manipulatively trying to leech on somebody else or get a false credit on a song, which is like the #1 no-no in town. But there's also rules in here. I hope that songwriters that are new to town know you don't walk up with your demo to Big Loud Shirt and Craig Wiseman if he's parking his truck and say, "Hey, listen to my song." It's just not how it works. There's order and things, but you have more ability to potentially access your dream if you just do what everybody else came here and had to do and put in your time.
Yeah, you have to
So,
have patience. I've interviewed a lot of songwriters. I've interviewed Lori McKenna, Ashley Gorley, who I know are both in your book. And it's interesting because that area is still very, like you said, accessible. You can go to see these people performing at very small venues. You can introduce yourself. You can take away something from what they're giving in their performance. And that is the beauty of the Nashville songwriting community here.
yeah, the one thing that I think cautionarily we do point out in the book time and time and time again is you can't come here with your acoustic guitar and not have a plugin, as an example, on it to get into somebody else's PA.
Yeah.
You can't come here and noodle over somebody else's song while they're doing their round. We try to give you some of the etiquette, but also you've got to be savvy with a computer, okay? If you don't know how to put together a track, if you don't know how to go get a free beat off of the many places on YouTube that have copyright free beats you can use to lay some kind of a demo down. So when you walk into a songwriting session, you're bringing ideas of your own. You got to have 4 or 5 minimum. You got to be able to throw a next one out. You got to be rehearsed. You got to know how to. So those pitches that songwriters need to learn to even communicate with veteran songwriters that are giving them that shot to get on their writing roster for that day. I can't tell you the number, because I know many of them just from over the course of the series that'll tell me like, yeah, I don't work with people that come in and say, "What do you got?" Like if they're a Rhett Akins, they don't need to be in the room with somebody that can't bring the idea, because he can come up with the idea. He's looking to be excited. Somebody like Ashley, I don't. I think with Tape Room, the way it's grown now, like as generous with his time and talent as he is with the number of young writers he works with, generally, if you look at it, that's even an example where Ashley kind of helped discover these guys and give them their start and then mentors and stays with them. So the loyalty factor is really important. But like you said, if you go to those writer rounds and you're one of the, you don't know which of those songwriters that might have been playing earlier than you are still sitting there listening, because that's the finger on the pulse of the next generation of new writers, right? Belmont,
Exactly.
if you go to Belmont, has got fantastic internships. You're not going to get paid, but you can go and work at Spirit Music all day with Frank and learn from him. Or you can, that's where Chris Stapleton started. I mean, you could go to Jesse Frazier and Stevie Frazier's outfit and get an internship there. There are songwriters here who will give you those opportunities. You're giving them your free labor in some respects, or very modestly paid labor, but you're getting exposure. What is the number one party like? I've never asked to go, nor have I tried. I don't want to be in that environment because it clouds what I do. But for an intern, that's a great place to go, just even network and meet, go to these big conference things that they do here and help set up. And then you get to meet other people like yourself who are new and just, go play on Broadway in spite of the locals don't go to Broadway thing. Go there and try to get a job there, because
Yeah.
those are really, especially if this no tax on tips thing passes, etc. But yeah, man, it's just it's so I think, to answer your question, like, Nashville has been my purest kind of, not paradise. Well, it really has, because I moved here when an apartment was $400 a month. You know what I mean?
Same
And
here. Yeah.
you got the opportunity to I got the opportunity to work full time, and I do 7 days a week even to date. But um the opportunities you keep getting from this place, you got to give back in terms of I think, like, dedication to and understanding that, if you don't give that next kid a chance, like if you don't give that next person where you get the opportunity to, maybe, you can even just refer, you can't ever give someone's demo to someone, but you can refer them and say, hey, this person's really good if you need an extra session player, like to do soloing and, for work tapes cheap, or,
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
hopefully that kind of loyalty and camaraderie and community, as cheesy as those words sound, continue to really be the in my opinion, the sort of band that holds this whole town together.
Yeah, it's kind of like Laurie McKenna's the last line of Humble and Kind, turn around and help the next one in line. But that's
You
that's
put
the truth. That's the truth. So
put that better than I could, but yeah, absolutely. And Lori is somebody who's been very generous in a mentor sense as well. And like Liz, and others. I mean, everybody here, especially the female writers. We even have Wanda Millette in this book, who wrote "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places" from Urban Cowboy. Matresa Berg, Marla Cannon Goodman. I could go on. Everybody here got their start by somebody else opening that door for them and giving them that shot. And it's
exactly.
still how it works. Yeah.
Well, hold the book up one more time because it comes out at the end of this month and we are all so excited to read it. It's so lovely to have the opportunity to talk with you. You have a front row seat to some of the artists and celebrities that so many people would love to be in the room with. So it's great to be able to access them through your books.
Oh, well, that's
Thank
kind
you
of you.
so
Yeah.
much. Yeah, thank you for taking a minute with me.
Oh, please. Absolutely. Been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your support.